everybody. That was fun. Good way to start a whole talk on cybersecurity. I think we're waiting for one more panelist, but let me go ahead and share my screen here. It looks like we've already got 20 people in here already. Awesome. Good job. Those of you that were able to join on time. We are dealing with all sorts of fun, folks. I'm sure you guys are doing through the same thing, depending on where you live. But Tapu and I are both from Texas, so it's always fun to see what's going to happen in terms of the weather and electricity. So thank you guys for your flexibility in advance as we get ready to start this presentation. I'm going to go get my slide up here. And we'll wait for Mr. Hintz to join us as well before we get into this. But yeah, here in Texas, for those of you that don't know or haven't watched the news locally lately or nationally, having all sorts of fun with our weather systems. So, but I do thank you guys for joining us today on this talk about cybersecurity. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait just a couple more minutes. We're going to get started. I know we're a little late already, but we'll make sure we get through all of this in time. I'm going to wait a couple minutes. I'm going to play a little bit of music here. And you guys have available to you the chat as well. So those of you that are on the call, if you like, while we're waiting for our final panelists to join us, go ahead and sign in to the chat there. Tell us who you are and where you're joining from. How much snow did you get? Naomi asks, if you're a northerner, you're going to laugh because it's not really a lot of snow, guys. It was like 6 inches, but for Texas.
Hey, Carl, can you hear me?
Yeah.
If you don't mind, since I may have bigger power issues, I'm going to go ahead and make you the host. Okay?
Okay, good idea.
Okay.
All right, so we got some folks from snowy, Teresa from snowy San Antonio joining us as well.
All right, Carl, you are the host.
All right, thank you. All right, and I'm getting Mr. Hintz in there set up. So I see we got some folks from snowy San Antonio from all the way up in New York. Joanne is laughing at us right now with our snow. Yes, Naomi, you have seen a lot of ice photos. You haven't seen the best ones though, because the best ones are sitting right now in my shower in our bathroom as we have lost all water in our house. We have electricity and we have internet, but we didn't realize until today how much we miss the water and the hot water. Kevin's joining us as well from Oklahoma. Also, yeah, some freezing weather. Yep, yeah. It's been interesting to see what we call our snowbid Maslow's hierarchy of needs as we go in. Hey, there's Phil joining us as well. Right. And thank you guys so much. Yep, we're just getting started, Phil. No problems there. It looks like you're, I might need to rename you too. There we go. Let me make sure I get you renamed there because you've stolen Anisha's name. This is a perfect way to start a panel on cybersecurity.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Because the kids today, they will do this too, right? Okay.
Zoom bombing.
Zoom bombing is the thing. So let me turn down my music a little bit. Thank you guys for those of you that were waiting for us to get on. This is being recorded, so you got to see that whole fun beginning as well. For those of you that are watching this as a review, I see that we have 22 guests that have also joined us today. Thank you, those of you that are signing into the chat. Say hello. We're going to keep this fairly conversational, guys. We do have some experts here that I'm about to introduce, but I want to make sure that if you have questions or ideas or thoughts, feel free to drop them into the chat as well. I'll be monitoring that as well. Sandy's joining us all the way from New Jersey. Sandy's laughing at my snow humor there as well, as she's from up in Jersey. So let's get right into this, guys, because we're already starting a little bit late, so I want to make sure we have time to get through all these questions. But first, before we do that, a couple quick shout outs. First of all, thank you, Rex Academy, for hosting this event. One thing that's been near and dear to my heart, and those of you that have listened to the Undisrupted podcast with Adam and I, we talk a lot about cybersecurity with all of our guests, including Sandy and Phil on a soon to be coming episode at some point. So I think it's something that's in the back of all of our minds as tech leaders. And again, some of you are in the call, maybe a teacher, you can put that out in the chat as well. And those of you watching this later, you may be a computer science teacher, you may be a director of technology, you may be a librarian. Everybody has to wear this hat when it comes to cybersecurity. And I think what's happened in our past is that all of us have kind of provisioned it out to the one tech person in the school or in the district, when the reality is we all have to own part of it. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how do we make that happen in our schools and what are some ideas and strategies around that. And so I'm excited to bring about 3 amazing panelists from all different perspectives of this too. So we've got Anisha Reddy. She's joining us from, she's an education privacy fellow from the Future of Privacy Forum. You're going to hear from her in just a second, all the way from DC, again, laughing at my snow humor, I'm sure. And then we've got Tapu Ahmed, who's a former computer science teacher. He's now, I guess you call yourself the kind of the curriculum director of sorts, right, at Rex Academy. Is that right, Tapu?
That is correct.
And Tapu is just now overcoming. He's finally on the back end of his COVID experience, so he's able to talk and breathe a little bit better today. So we're excited to see you back up and running there, Tapu. And then Phil, who went through his COVID experience already a while back, is joining us as well. Phil, who I've known for several years, Director of Student Information out of Chicago there, Barrington 220 in Chicago, for those who are keeping track. Say hi there, Phil.
Hello.
Also with the very appropriate Star Wars background. Very, very well done there, sir. Yes, lots of stuff happening with cybersecurity here. We're going to get right into this. So I'm going to start off with the first question to the panelists. And so we've kind of done a quick intro of yourself, but what I want you to do is tell me what's something right at this moment, because all of you wear different hats when it comes to cybersecurity, whether it's teacher, director, or the national view. What's something that's keeping you up at night right now around cybersecurity? Anisha, we're going to kick off with you first. Also known as not Phil Hens. I love it. Thank you for taking
I had to. So like Carl mentioned, I'm actually a policy counsel at the Future of Privacy Forum. And one of the things we do is focus on consumer data and data use in general. But since 2013 and 2014, we saw an uptick in student privacy laws being enacted across the states. So we have about 45 states have student privacy laws in place right now. And some of those laws actually impose specific security requirements, either on school districts, either on state agencies, or even on third-party vendors. But in most cases, these are unfunded mandates. So that makes it really tough for folks to know how to comply, have the resources to comply, making sure that they're vetting technology that they're using has these kinds of security protocols in place. So those are all things that we're trying to keep track of and make sure that we get resources out to the folks who need it. And in addition to that, I thought it was worth sharing. One of my colleagues was a district technologist, and he was like, you have to share this story with folks because there's going to be computer science teachers on this call. And he said that what kept him up at night was students that are in these classes that may be assigned to investigate companies or investigate websites and actually end up exploiting or finding sort of any security vulnerability in these websites. And he was saying that exposed us to liability, exposed the district to liability, exposed the teacher to liability in some cases, because it could potentially be criminal activity that's happening. So I had to share it. Pass over to you, Carl.
I think that's perfect. I think that's a perfect segue, because I think that's one of the things that I always worried about too as a director of innovation was like, what are we telling these kids? Like, we teach them too much, then they could get into harmful things and mischief. But at the same time, we also know, those of you that are on this call probably know this too, that if you don't show them things, they're going to figure out ways around it. So maybe this is an opportunity, which leads me over to Tapu, who's actually he and I have had several conversations about this as well, because some of the curriculum that he's developed actually goes into that. And my first thing was like, wow, that's kind of scary. You're teaching kids how to spoof and how to like spoof a website and do phishing. So Tapu, what's keeping you up at night around cybersecurity? And then maybe you want to hit on what Anisha just said, that kind of worry, that concern that's out there. And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Here we go. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I was actually a computer science teacher for a good amount of time. And it was interesting watching kids who were never taught this stuff figure it out on their own. The thing that keeps me up at night is that as I built a lot of our cybersecurity curriculum, it became very, very apparent to me that our typical citizen, just following the basics of making sure that we're secure online, we're not doing. Let's forget about the complicated exploits and all the different things that we can teach and do with tools, right? I did something very simple like spoof an email and send it to my dad. And my dad clicked on it. And I'm like, what are you doing? You don't click on that stuff. Google Mail, Gmail even flagged it. It said, do not click on this. And he clicked on it. And I could have stuck in any amount of malware in there. And then from our school standpoint, our kids had the same thing. They're making these basic, fundamental, what are you thinking type of mistakes that as a teacher, I really want to clean up, because this requires just basic knowledge and understanding and just good practice from really an early age. Because if we can clean up a lot of that, it would really clean up a lot of the problems that we have on the internet itself.
I think that's an important thing to remember there. Phil, you're chomping at the bit to jump in there when he was telling that story. You want to jump in on there too? Tell us what's keeping you up tonight, but also like kind of adding on to what Tapu meant.
Sure, and you know, having put together a pre-K through 8th grade computer science immersion initiative in my past life, in my past district, you know, this is something we want to start from the ground up. That training right away, as you know, we feel computer science is another language, and it should. And the sooner you learn it, the younger you learn it, the more it's going to be a part of who you are, just like a foreign language. But what keeps me up at night now in my new role as a director of student information systems is I've taken on the responsibility. Our state is one of those states that is the 45 states that Anisha mentioned that is adopted. And as of July 1st, we will have to be compliant with our state mandate, which is SOPA. It's Student Online Personal Protection Act. And it requires us to have a data privacy agreement with every one of the vendors that we use, every app that we use, keeping an inventory of every app to make sure we have those privacy agreements in place. The thing that keeps me up at night is those third parties, is those other people. Like I can do everything in my power within our district to build firewalls and build the securities that we need to have on campus here. And do the training that we need to do with our teachers and with our students. But it's the other guys, it's the other folks that if they've got a hole in their system that allows a data breach to happen, that exposes the data that I've submitted to them from my district into them, now it becomes not just their problem, but my problem as well, which then exposes brings the parents involved, and now parents are questioning how good are your systems, even though it was totally quote unquote out of your control. Now it's a problem that we have to deal with, and so that keeps me up at night. Being able to trust those companies to actually stand up to the agreements that they are signing, that they are pledging to withhold. So.
Yeah, and I think that's, we have a couple folks on the call from New York too, I'm noticing. So I think that's something too, that you talk about, that extra level of privacy, the extra level of concern in terms of like making sure that what kind of data are they capturing? I mean, there's more and more states kind of coming around to that. Tapu, do you want to jump on that too?
Yeah, I actually, what Phil mentioned was so critically important. The number one reason we have these breaches, as Phil mentioned, it's not necessarily because the system isn't secure. It's human error. Somebody along the way did not follow proper protocol. They were supposed to have deleted something, removed something from the files. Just some sort of protocol was not followed. Nobody kind of followed up with it. And then 3 months later, what the heck? How did this data leak? There you go.
And I think that's actually a good segue into, I'm going to kind of skip over to our next question here, because we kind of shared a couple stories there. We may get a chance to share some more, but I think that's a big part of this too, is that human element. And it's like, how do we as leaders or as teachers or on the national level, how do we really make people realize this is such an important thing? And it's kind of one of those things like, well, I know it's important, but it happens to other people, or maybe if it happens to me, we can fix it, or someone's going to fix it for me. So I guess that's the next part, because I think you're right. I think with the latest data I saw, is something like 91% now of all hacks are done through some sort of phishing scam. So like our passwords and all that's getting better and better, but we're still socially being hacked, so to speak. So how do we impart that on our students, but also on our teachers too? And the other thing I'll mention real quick is that I got to speak with a cybersecurity expert out of Australia recently. Craig Hunt is his name. Is actually his sister is actually an amazing art teacher, named Kathy Hunt. But he shared with me, he said, the number one password that is in the world, the number one password that everyone uses, and I wonder if people in the chat can guess what it is. It's a 6-character password, by the way. There's two. There's almost a tie for first. Number one is a 6-character password. And go ahead. Yes, Mark got it already, by the way. He hit it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I've seen "I love you" used a lot.
And I've
I
seen,
love you was
I've seen
in
the
the
word
top
password.
10. Password is number 2. Password was number 2. And then number 3, if it had to be 8 characters and it wasn't password, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're still not there yet. I mean, on some of that stuff, but the good news is we're shifting to more of the biometrics, and those things are going to help us on that front. It's still not going to address the big issue that you just mentioned, Tapu, which is that idea that people are still falling for it. Our parents are falling for it. I mean, our colleagues are falling for it. So for this question here, and then I'll leave it up to you, any one of you wants to lead off with this. What are some of the, how do we make them realize that it's important? I mean, what are the things we need to be doing and showing them? And it's not all scary too, because guys, those of you on the call probably know this, there's a lot of things out there that like we could scare everybody to death, but we want to empower you to go forward with this. So Phil, you want to take that one first?
Sure. Well, one of the things I like to bring up is the idea that we need to educate. I mean, that's our jobs, is to educate. And so we actually have invested in a program called Know Before, which I know some folks on here I'm sure have heard. And if you haven't, you might talk with your director of technology to see if they can start adapting a system like this. But it allows us to test our teachers. Not just it's 2-part. We educate them on the pitfalls that are out there that are typical. Whether it's recognizing an email address or knowing not to click on a link, and if it's asking for your social security number, for example, you probably shouldn't be clicking on that. So it's the education aspect of it, but it's also then testing them after you've educated them and given them a test that is a safe test. And we just recently did one of these, because with COVID, it brings up with COVID coming out and the pandemic, these scammers that are out there, the people that are really trying to attack are taking advantage of a crisis, and they're taking advantage of a crisis that will be hopefully to their benefit. And so we thought that same lines, and all our teachers right now are trying in the state of Illinois to get access to the vaccines. And so we actually put out a request to sign up for a vaccine for the COVID. And we had all the telltale signs. It was coming from a very, very fake looking email address. It had links asking for things that you shouldn't be asking for. So we still caught people. We still caught people because they were so hungry to get the vaccine, as they should be, right? But at the same time, there's a right way and a wrong way. And so we really took advantage of the crisis ourselves to find out who needs more education, who needs more training on what to look for, and to know that this is a very real thing and it happens every single day. That coupled with, I will say, the other thing that's really big in Illinois right now is unemployment fraud. And a lot of teachers are being targeted for that right now. And so we want to educate them on what not to share, and that if they get some weird email that says, requesting them for some information involving employment, that they should immediately talk to their HR departments of their school districts to find out if they, and a lot of times it is the HR departments that are reaching out to those employees to say, hey, we've gotten a request for unemployment for you. Are you aware of this? And so it's bringing that attention to them as well. Those are some of the things that we are working on every single day.
I think it goes back to that whole idea that it doesn't belong to one person. I mean, as much as there's probably a point person in every district, it has to be, the awareness level has to be brought up amongst all departments. I know business offices, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I've seen this also for some folks that are probably on this call, that they've experienced the idea of like of a principal spoofing, getting an email spoof from a principal. It's just a Gmail, right? And it's some weird characters, but they don't look at that. They just click on it and say, oh, I need a gift card for Amazon real quick. Can you send it to some? I've heard that story so many times from all the tech leaders that we've talked to. And it's amazing how people still, like, in the course of a day, you're just going through so many things, like, oh yeah, sure, here, I'll send you whatever, without even looking at really the full email on that. So it's a lot of things that we need to raise that level of awareness. And by the way, speaking of, I can already tell we have a very sophisticated audience, because Phil, while you were talking, I put the Know Before link in the chat. And immediately people were like, Sam was saying, are we supposed to click on this, or is this a test? So that was, yeah, I'll leave that up to you guys. But I was just sharing the program that Phil was talking about, that Know Before program, which is a phishing program. And then Sandy also mentions, and we'll kick it over to Anisha next for your thoughts on this. Sandy mentioned something about Sophos, which is something she's using. It's like a phishing campaign program too that actually has videos on how to train teachers. Like, what are some of the things you need to keep on the lookout for? So I think this all needs to get folded into those required trainings we do every year, like the bloodborne pathogens and sexual harassment, those things that we do with our staff on a yearly basis. This just needs to be a part of that rotating cycle. Anisha, what about you? What are your thoughts on how do we raise that level of awareness?
I think 100% more education is necessary, like everyone was saying so far. But one of the things that we at FPF do is actually try to conduct those education and awareness raising campaigns. So we saw a demonstrated increase in COVID-related phishing attempts, especially at schools. So an email from a principal saying that the COVID protocol has changed at our school, please click here to get updated. So things like that have been happening, not just at your school or not just through what you've been testing, Bill. And one of the things that we try to do in general is to try to really personalize the stories to educator experiences. So Carl, you've heard this story before, I'm sure, but one of the stories that we like to tell is, especially because in most cases, educators may not see that the information they hold at schools is necessarily something that's a target for attack. So having a student's name or email address, it's probably not the same as having someone's credit card information. So there might not be that connection at that level being made. But we all know, everyone on this call definitely knows that schools are targets for ransomware attacks and things like that. So a couple of years ago in 2017, a bunch of rural school districts in Montana, Texas, and I believe a couple of other states were targets of ransomware attacks. And this is a story that we like to tell. We don't like the story, but we like to tell it to kind of get people like, oh, this is something we need to care about. They were targeted for ransomware attacks. A bunch of student data was held by these hackers, and parents started receiving texts saying that there was going to be a school attack at the school. There was going to be another Sandy Hook that happened at the school. Those are the kind of threats that they were getting. Obviously, extremely terrifying. I mean, who would want to send their kid to school after that? Schools were shut down for a couple of days, and it just goes to show, just even a student's phone number can cause so much harm. And it's a very scary feeling as well. And in addition to that, some of the hackers actually posted student information online, and you can imagine how scary that is for student addresses to be posted. If there are potential sexual predators in the neighborhood, now they have access to student information in their local area. They know where high school age students live and things like that. So that story usually gets people thinking, oh, we really do need to protect and we need to stand up good cybersecurity practices in our schools, because we didn't realize we were targets, but we really are. And this is what harm could actually happen. So really personifying it and making the situation applicable to educator situations really, really helps.
Yeah, I think that the power of story will get them, especially if it's, I think if you make it closer to home, the better, because if you're hearing about a company that got hacked, or LinkedIn got hacked and everyone's data was exposed, and well, that's a big company. I mean, still, if it can happen to them, it could happen to any district, right? I think sometimes we just don't realize how sensitive that data is. Tapu, what about you in terms of, I guess, raising awareness, because you're in a different situation where you're teaching kids in a lot of ways. So how do you, I mean, you're teaching the next generation about this stuff. So what are you telling them? What are the things to, like, make sure that they realize it's not just all fun and games, and hackers are those cool guys that have the hoodies on that are looking at a matrix screen, right? All the time. That's the image that pops into my head every time I hear the word hacker. So what are some things you're sharing with those students, but also your colleagues?
I've always tried to boil it down to the stuff that they actually use. So for my kids, it's always been about video games, streaming, using the internet. So some of the things, so let's take, for example, this Zoom call that we're doing right now. So the goal of the whole thing is to protect your confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, right? Zoom, one of the reasons it's become so popular is it has end-to-end encryption. And what that means, guys, is that even the creators of Zoom cannot hack this call. At least it's not supposed to be. If it's been implemented the right way, at least to the degree that we've been told, even the people who own the Zoom servers cannot hack into this call. I talked to them about the fact that, hey, you know how you like playing video games a little bit? Yeah, well, guess what? Here's kind of these things that are running in the background to guarantee confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all of this stuff. And because if this is not there, even something as simple as streaming like Netflix, if those things aren't there, I think, have all of you heard of something called SSL 256? Maybe you've people have heard of this before, or even just SSL alone. That one protocol, Carl, is responsible for making sure that nobody messes with you. And when explained in the right framework, it actually catches their attention quite a bit. Hey, look, I kind of want to know how all of this works a little bit, you know, and it's when you attach it to a kind of a prior learning experience, meaning, hey, well, of course I know how video games work. Okay, great, awesome. But do you know how we secure the whole thing? This usually catches their interest. Usually their ears perk up a little bit, and we can talk a little bit more about the X's and O's than otherwise normally would. So
I think, yeah, tying it and connecting it to something they know. I've shared this story before too, but like my niece, when she was 16, got into this tool called Snapchat. You remember that? It's still around. But it had just come out, and I was very fascinated by it. Right, the idea behind Snapchat, of course, you know, that you could take a picture and it would disappear and be gone forever. And so I think right around the same time, there was a white hat hacker who had come out and basically said that he was going to purge. He gave Snapchat kind of a warning, so to speak. He's like, listen, there's some failabilities, some things in your infrastructure, in your system that I can break into. If you don't fix them, I'm going to expose those. And they said, yeah, whatever. But then he did, and he posted it online, and it was on the internet, and with instructions on how to do it, including a downloaded CSV of everyone's account and all their information and all their photos. Geez. So what was amazing to me was when I'm talking to her, this is my 16-year-old niece, you know, I'm like, so right now, you know, I have his instructions. By the way, the government pulled it off. For those of you that are on this call probably know there's something called the way back machine, you know, archive.org. So I was able to go back and find the original post and able to do it all. And I sat there and I queued up the hack and I got ready to hit go and pull down I said, I'm going to pull down all the photos that you ever posted on Snapchat. And her face turned extremely white. She goes, well, I said, wait a minute, why is your face turning white? And she's like, well, it may not be me, but you know, friends sent me a picture. And I was like, yeah, so I just want you to know that things aren't just point to point. I mean, everything goes to a system and a server and everything's being protected. So, you know, ideally it's being protected well, like you were saying with that point to point encryption, but sometimes it's not. So I think that's also another bigger conversation about digital citizenship to kind of open up to our students.
Carl, it's, I mean, we're told this, it's not like any of us can actually confirm it, you know, so a lot of this, we're relying, there's a great degree of trust that we're imbuing on these end systems to make sure that the cyber pros who actually work there actually are following the proper protocols and rules.
Yeah, that brings us to kind of this idea. Oh, Nisha, do you want to jump in there too? Tell us a quick little thing, and we'll drop into this next idea here about online, because we're kind of getting into this now, the data privacy, online identity conversation.
Yeah, all I was going to say was that 100% awareness helps at least individuals develop their own kind of risk matrix. Like, this is what I want to balance. This is how I want to engage, because I know what could potentially happen. Because it's not always worst case scenario that a hacker is going to actually do what they did in that story. Like, that's obviously the worst case scenario. But it's more about knowing how you can responsibly engage and what kind of trust you are putting. So like being knowledgeable about the trust you're putting into the services that you're using.
And so and kind of going into that, I mean, hacking is a big part. We think of cybersecurity, I think hacking, that's kind of the big thing. There's also these kind of elements of the online identity and the data privacy. And I can't remember, one of you, I think it was Phil that was mentioning earlier that, you know, as these, and Anisha, you mentioned this too, kind of as we switched to COVID, there was this real big kind of deluge of, here's all these free things, teachers. We're going to help you out. We're going to give you freemium versions of things, sign off on this, check this TOS, and just roll right on in, right? And so what, you know, in terms of data privacy, how are these kind of tied into cybersecurity, or what are some things you're hearing, or how are people dealing with it when you talk about companies and taking that data, or what they're doing with the data, I guess? Because I know there's some districts, some probably on this call, that will hear the word Google and immediately say, absolutely not, I'm not touching that, because of what they do with their data. And so, you know, we need to talk about what is the reality out there in terms of what's happening with this data. So, Phil, you want to tackle that one first?
Sure, I can talk about that. You know, in fact, it's interesting that you brought up Google. Google is one of the ones that we as a state, a lot of our state directors are trying to get that data privacy agreement, the DPA that I mentioned earlier, with Google. And And so far, Google's at least meeting with us and talking with us, but they haven't signed it yet. Yet every one of our districts utilizes Google on a day-to-day basis every single day. In fact, Google just released yesterday their new tiers of different enterprise levels that we are going to have to start paying for if we want more security and more data privacy.
Speaking of freemium, yes.
Yeah, freemium into premium. And so that's definitely one of those that's at the table. Facebook's another one. A lot of districts use Facebook for their marketing of their district, their branding of their district, along with Twitter and several of the other social medias out there. It's getting those big wigs to sign on to the data privacy. That Apple recently is trying to make. Obviously, they've done a really good job of, or they're about to release the ability to have a little more control over the privacy, and they've done a huge commercial campaign for that. And Facebook was one of those that said, "Hey, we don't like what you're about to do, Apple, because that's closing us out of some revenue and all that." So those are all behind the scenes things that are literally the thing that amazed me the most when I started diving into student data privacy is a lot of the vendors that we use, and I could name a number of them, and I don't know if I should or shouldn't, but they are utilizing Facebook analytics in the background. They're utilizing Twitter analytics in the background, Google analytics in the background. And you may have no idea that they're utilizing that in order to obviously improve their product, but to target the different data banks that they are getting in terms of students' first names, last names, email addresses, usernames, passwords, all of that stuff, in order to do more guerrilla marketing, if you will, in the background. And these companies, until I found that out, in fact, we found it out by we were having a problem with one of the apps we were using, and they as we were getting down to it, they were pointing to our Wi-Fi. We were pointing to to them not delivering the product, or that something was going on. And when we really broke it down with their engineers and our engineers, and all of a sudden, and we were blocking Facebook, and all of a sudden we decided to open Facebook, and voila, their product worked just fine. All of a sudden, their app worked just fine. And when we realized that, that was an eye opener, because nowhere in their terms of service do they ever say, "Hey, by signing on with us, you agree to us passing data on to Facebook." Nowhere did they ever say that. And so, and it's a fairly well used. I know, Carl, you use this particular app in your former district. We use it currently in our district, and yet these are the type of things that are happening in the background, and that's all student data privacy. That is the data. Those are the agreements that we're trying to put in place to prevent that type of thing from happening. Now, there are a couple of great platforms that are out there also, I will say, that have been developed to track the apps and track and actually grade and monitor and kind of be that third party evaluator of these apps to see how well they rank on student data privacy. Education Framework is one of those that's out there, but there's a number of them out there. I'm sure Anisha could Anisha's company, I'm sure, is one of those as well. But that help inform districts as to what is actually being shared, when it's being shared, and how much should be shared, that sort of thing. So those are things we're dealing with daily as well, as part of being compliant with student online privacy protection.
And I think those DSAs, as Mark mentions in the chat too, the challenge for a vendor then becomes managing multiple DSAs from multiple districts or a state or multiple states. So getting to more of that national, and I think Jackie dropped one in the chat too, a national DPA agreement. And Anisha probably has some more data or information about what that's looking like, because I know more and more states, Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, have been really pushing toward that kind of singleton or one single sheet, or in this case, 20 pages or 67 pages, I guess. Yeah. And the more we get to that, much like the IMS Global Initiative of getting that kind of uniformity in terms of how the data are uploaded and handled, I think then we're getting closer to that too. So yeah, standardized DSA would help not only school districts, but also help vendors. I think it would help everybody.
I'd like to add, because I see that in the chat, the SDPC, that is the NDP or NDPA that they have in there. Illinois has adopted that. We have a consortium in Illinois with the SDPC, and we are adopting the the NPA, the NDPA, National Data Privacy Agreement, the 1.0 that we see in there, the version 1.0. However, we threw that to our attorneys at the school district because we want to make sure that our attorneys are agreeing that we should be using this as our agreement that we are submitting to all of our vendors to sign. And the original agreement, the NDPA, is 22 pages. When we gave it to our attorney, they gave it back to us and said, yeah, that's good, but here's another 14 pages addendum that we need to add on to this one just for Barrington School District that we now need to hand out to all of our vendors. And that in some ways defeats the purpose of having a standardized national DPA that all vendors and all districts can share.
Right.
Because now ours all of a sudden has become unique because we have to add these additional 14 pages. And those are some of the barriers and challenges that I'm currently working through as we speak. And I know that Illinois is actually thinking about a 2.0 version because most of the education attorneys for the state of Illinois and the school districts in the state of Illinois are all sharing this idea. And so I think the 2.0 is going to actually include this addendum that our attorneys added, that all the other attorneys are agreeing, yeah, that should be also added. It's just amazing.
It goes back to it's the national versus states' rights. It just continues. Like, remember Common Core and all that, and now Texas had to have its own. And as we're learning with our power grid, that's not always great. Anisha, what about on the national level though? What are you seeing in terms of progress on that side? In terms of maybe some sort of standardized or base document, like a couple that have been shared, or is there a state that's just like nailing this right now?
So Phil, before you even mentioned the NDPA and before that was mentioned in the chat, that's 100% what I was going to point to. So SCPC's efforts have been really trailblazing in creating some sort of collective effort to make sure that there are standards across the board, or at least state specific. And this goes back to also the state student privacy laws that I mentioned, where they really can complicate things for vendors when it comes to making sure they have each specific kind of instance of a random requirement that's unique to a specific state in play. And it makes things difficult for districts, obviously, who are trying to build up negotiation power to make sure that there's compliance across the board. So I know that the national DPA efforts are still continuing. One of my colleagues is actually part of the working group that's helping kind of negotiate the language there, because we have kind of umbrella view over what kind of state specific unique requirements there are out there. But it comes down to, Phil, I think the efforts that you guys are doing to create a 2.0 that's unique to Illinois based on the feedback that you've gotten, that's going to help in Illinois, of course, if that does end up working. Massachusetts, I believe, is a state that has done a really great job of making things standardized across the board. But like I mentioned before, it does come down to resources for school districts. No matter what, like if an agreement is being signed, it comes down to data governance at the district and school level, because these contracts are only being signed when a contract is being used to use a tool in a school. So there are instances where teachers might just find a new tool online that they think would be really helpful for their classroom and just use it and have their students sign up, or actually sign up their students for it, without potentially knowing that there is a district protocol that needs to go through a procurement process, if it's a free tool, especially. So it comes down to really like education at every level. All school staff should be aware that there are potentially district policies, or at least know that there should be district policies governing how student data is being collected. And additionally, there's difficulty if there aren't resources dedicated to providing staff and time to vet companies. It's hard to tell what their practices are and if they're in line with the DPA at all. And especially with smaller companies, they could just be pressured to sign these DPAs without being sure if they even have these practices in place. I mean, that's just guessing. I'm not saying anything about certain small companies or anything like that, but I think the onus is on schools to really know what companies are doing, and that's really tough without the resources or education.
Yeah, so Phil, go ahead. You want to jump back in on that real quick?
Well, yeah, I was going to add two things. Number one, the addendum that our attorneys want to add talks about dollar amounts of cybersecurity insurance that we as a district should hold, but also that the vendors should hold should we get into a data breach with either their product or our data in their product. And it's forcing the vendors to also foot the bill when that data breach happens for all the things that we need to, the communications efforts that we need to put out to our parents and to our students to let them know the data breach happened, to offer the free credit monitoring and all that stuff. Somebody's got to foot the bill. It's not free, and that should be the vendor if the data breach indeed happened at the vendor level. And so that's part of what's in that addendum, which is different than what you'll see in a normal data privacy agreement, but very important. The other aspect I was going to say is it's developing a culture of privacy first. When we're talking about teachers and teachers we are encouraging them to be innovative in the classroom, find these tools that help their individualized instruction with their students. But at the same time, we want them to think about privacy before they think even about the curriculum of that tool, and so it's there again, it's education, teaching teachers what to look for in data privacy before they even, start getting so excited and enamored with this great app. They need to have the privacy first culture developed and mentality developed before they even get so excited, because if they can pass that part, the privacy part, then the fun can start to really begin to happen. But there's no sense in going down that path and then us, the technology directors, being the bad guy and saying, sorry, we got to shut you down because you didn't look at this, and this first, Hate to be the guy that says no, I'd rather be the guy that says yes.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think Nisha just dropped in there too. Also, that student privacy. What is that, Nisha? That's a resource there for training for student privacy training.
Yeah. So at SPF we host an education privacy resource website called Student Privacy Compass, and there is where we drop pretty much all of the resources that we create, all of the training videos. And we actually started developing them because of the pandemic and because we saw an increased uptick in just misunderstandings about how technology is used in the classroom, lack of awareness about free tools and how they can, they may not be built with student privacy in mind. So we definitely wanted to address that as much as possible. So we came out with this training. And we have a bunch of other resources there that can help. So security, vetting checklists and things like that. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about any of that.
Yeah, a great organization, a lot of free resources out there for you guys. And I know that some of you that are joining are not necessarily gearheads or tech guys or tech directors. So there's some teachers in this chat too. And I think someone mentioned about ISTE. I will say that ISTE and COSIN also have some standards there in terms of ways that you can help teachers kind of be more aware of this. But as we kind of kick it over to the student side of it too, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to this next question. And Tapu hasn't had a chance to share with us in a little bit, because he's kind of representing two things in this case. He's representing the student, who is the one missing person I will say that we don't have on this right now. We need to see like what is their perspective. So you're our closest link to that. And then also a teacher side of this in terms of like what should we actually be teaching, and then tell us a little bit about the cybersecurity. So one of the things I'll tell you when I met Tapu is I learned about his company and this idea of teaching kids cybersecurity, which up to this point, honestly, as a director, I'd only seen like kind of curriculum around digital citizenship, like the kind of standard, what to do and not do online, but nothing that really got into the meat and like the back end systems of what cybersecurity is. So tell us, we'll start with you, Tapu, and then we'll kind of go to all around their group too, to talk about what are some things we should be teaching our students when it comes specifically to cybersecurity.
Yeah, I would say number one, so good practices are always a good thing. So one of the things I've seen from our students is, well, I'm actually from adults as well, unfortunately. Let's say we have a piece of software. Actual copy is going to cost me $300. So what do? We go to piratebay.org and we start thinking out a way to get out of that, paying that $300, right? And the issue, as you can imagine right away, that bootleg copy or that illegal copy is probably not the safest thing to install on our machines. So beyond that, understanding digital identity is a huge task in education. So I know in Rex Academy, as we attempted to design our cyber curriculum, understanding this concept of a digital footprint, that all of us have digital footprints and that you can find things about people you can't even imagine using IP addresses, using even just their phone numbers, and just the interesting things that can just show up there, and that it never truly goes away, is a huge part of our education platform. And then beyond all that, it's so many different ways, Carl, that we can exploit this thing for, and then you mentioned this before, you can do it for bad reasons. This is the thing we as educators really have to hammer in with our students. I think you and I, when you and I talked, we mentioned, the example we used was karate, that you can teach somebody karate and then he can go out and start beating up kids, which is exactly what we don't want. We want you to use the tools to become a cyber defender, understand the moral, ethical implications of these set of skills. So beyond just teaching these skills, it's really, really, really important that we really, really hammer home the fact that you're a good guy. Don't take advantage of these things. Don't misuse these things. I'm sure there's going to be a few kids that always will. I mean, there's no way to get out of it, I suppose. And it's something school districts are always afraid of, right? Hey, we're going to shut down Google because our kids figured out how to do this exploit. Well, I mean, it's not what we wanted. It's not the end result we wanted. We wanted them to be able to have the knowledge, but be able to be secure cyber defenders. So it's something that certainly, as we teach kids these a lot of different skills that we want them to learn, and we want them to master to be good cyber defenders. It's something we're going to have to probably wrestle with going forward as far as education is concerned.
Yeah, I think that genie's out of the bottle at this point. You know, it ain't going back in. So it's a lot about, you know, when it comes to change or anything in any walk of life, is it?
If I may,
yeah.
A quick little example. This wasn't even cybersecurity class. If anyone is a computer science teacher here, I was. So here's the thing: we're doing file systems in Java. Okay, file systems, how to read and write to files. Without any input from me, my kids figured out, if I put data in an infinite loop and I keep writing to the same file, what will happen? Well, they did it. And guess what? It filled up the entire system memory, and the operating system started to glitch because it started running out of memory. And they proudly called me over, Mr. T, look at what I did. I'm like, what'd you do? And I could see that the system started to crash because they'd taken up all the RAM. I never taught this. They figured it out all on their own. Wow. They figured out that an infinite loop, and you just keep writing to the same file, eventually just fills up the memory buffers. Amazing. That's kids for you.
Yeah, and it comes down to, do we want to discourage them and scare them from it and ourselves, or do we want to embolden and empower them? And I think when I think of, when you were talking, I was thinking about a former middle school student of mine who famously came up to me once and said, I can hack Skyward, which is our student information system. And I looked at him and I was like, okay. And like a teacher and a principal called him over and they're like, what should we do? And they bring me in, like, should we punish him? Should we figure out a way to like suspend his accounts or whatever? And I was like, wait a minute, let's think, is there another side to this? And he was coming to us, telling us he could do it. So obviously as a middle schooler, they don't really keep secrets very well. So I knew he was going to like probably brag about whatever he did. So I said, let's set up a sandbox or a private, some sort of different server that has dummy information in it. Then let him go ahead and test all the things that are wrong with it. But then I'm going to ask him to do the next thing, which is come back to me in a week and present your findings. I want you to put on a tie. I want you to stand up in front of a group of all of our tech heads and just say, these are the things I discovered, and here's how you fix them. And then we went in and fixed them. So, you know, you can empower them, or you can say, no, it's going to go away. So that's one of the things that I found most compelling about the curriculum. And I dropped a link in there in the chat too, from what you guys have come up with at Rex Academy. And that's that idea that we can empower them, because it's not going to go away anytime soon. So how do we continue to teach those kids the right things? Phil or Anisha, do you want to jump in on that too, about like that idea about, Anisha, you want to say something about what should we be teaching kids? I mean, we don't want to give them obviously everything, but at the same time, they're going to find it anyway in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're seeing in privacy too, in general. So one, to Tepu's point about when you're teaching students like computer science, I think the one thing that should be built in from the outset is cyber ethics. Students who are going to be building any systems or just shipping any product, they should be thinking about, if they want to do this for a living especially, they should be thinking about how they embed cyber ethics with whatever they're creating. And in the privacy world, a lot of folks are talking about privacy by design. So rather than shipping a product and finding out what's broken later after something horrible happens, really thinking through the systems that you can create. So mapping the data flows before you actually ship something and thinking through how the user can be empowered to really understand how their data is being used, how it's going to be secured against potential exploits that they might not be aware of yet, or things like that. Just really thinking through those thought exercises can be really, really helpful. You mentioned karate, and like I've been watching The Karate Kid. I've been rewatching Karate Kid, and like one of the takeaways that Mr. Miyagi has is basically patience, like with wax on, wax off, with all of the different little tasks. And being patient rather than moving fast and breaking things is probably the best thing that can be taught at a very early age for anyone who's building a system like this. And then on top of that, for students generally, just combining cybersecurity knowledge with the digital citizenship piece is essential. I mean, we want students to be good actors on the internet. They're going to be on the internet for all of their lives, practically. They're on the internet for school, et cetera. They're engaging with people online. So if they better understand the software, they'll better understand how they can protect their own privacy and how they can really engage with folks in a safe way online. And then they can be thoughtful about how they engage with technology. So it'll be lessons that kind of carry over across the board.
Tapu, you wanted to jump in on that too. You have a response to that, and we'll get over to Phil too on his thoughts.
No, I completely agree that you're going to have to build this thing in slow steps, and I think Phil had mentioned that it has to be a solution that starts from the very beginning. You educate students as early as possible, and it just keeps building over and over and over again throughout their entire educational career, just things that are reinforced. And as far as products are concerned, yeah, Anisha is absolutely right. You can't worry about cybersecurity after you've created it and then drop it and realize, hey, okay, well, what's not right? No, you have to think about it from day one. Any systems that you build. So yeah.
And now that we've handed all these devices to all these kids because of what's happened with remote learning, instantly we kind of have some onus now. A lot of it is, I mean, it's not so much go to the computer lab to learn about it now because they have it in their hands. So, and they've had it in their hands, to be honest, whether it be at their own device. But so Phil, what's your take on that too?
Well, I think, we are slowly but surely, school districts are realizing that, there's a need for this education. We realized it a number of years back, like I said, with our computer science immersion program, starting in kindergarten, and building upon that year after year with kids developing projects and, to the point where they could demonstrate their learning. But part of that learning is reverse engineering, and I think that's an important part for them to learn. And in computer science, that's an important part to learn, is the reverse engineering of let's break it to make it in a lot of ways. I think that's important. Something else that we could do a whole nother webinar on, and that would be esports. The districts bringing on esports, because it brings on all the collaboration, but also that reverse engineering starts to develop naturally, along with what Anisha was talking about, which is the ethics aspect of it. That yes, we can play the game this way, we can play to win, to borrow a phrase from Cobra Kai, strike first, strike hard, and so
We're
on.
getting a theme for this webinar now. There's a side theme. I like it. Yeah.
Exactly. But is that necessarily the right way to do things? And that's not necessarily the right way to do things. We want our kids to understand that there is a difference between right and wrong, even in the cyber world. So.
And I know we're getting close. We started a little late, but we're running out of time. But I want to make sure we have time for at least one more question, because I feel like this is a rare opportunity to have panels with these three different perspectives kind of on the same call. So I'm just going to ask you guys, kind of as we wrap up, what's kind of a word of advice or encouragement, I guess I would say, kind of going forward with educators that are, when they're thinking about all the things that we have to wrestle, and a lot of people on the call are watching this later. They're coming at from their perspective as a student, as a parent, as a teacher, as an administrator. What's a word of advice you would have for them kind of going forward as we kind of end in the call here today, and teaching them to be a sensei of cybersecurity, if you will. Sorry, had to throw that in there. Phil, go ahead. What you got?
Well, I was going to say, to challenge our educators, to challenge our parents, to reach out to the school districts and find out what's your stance on student data privacy. What's your stance on what are you doing to make your district more safe and more secure? For me, being a person that's in charge of some of that, I kind of look at that as like, oh my gosh, I'm being attacked in some ways. So be careful how you phrase that, but at the same time, I would encourage educators to reach out. What programs do you have that will help me to be a better consumer and to be a better driver on the cyber highway, super information highway, right? The going back to the old terms. Because I think educators need training, and they need the constant training. I love the fact that what you said a little while ago, that it should be required, just like bloodborne pathogens, because that is something they need to have. But I would ask our educators to reach out to the people in charge in their district that are responsible for cyber education and cybersecurity and student data privacy, and ask them what do they have. And don't be surprised if you hear, well, we haven't thought about that yet, or we're just starting to think about that, or something. Don't be surprised if you hear that, and don't be shocked if you hear that. But maybe partner with those people and say, well, how can I help to bring this about in our district, so that we have a better awareness overall, and that we are better prepared, because it's not if this is going to happen in my district, it really is when it's going to happen in the district. And so we want to be prepared, and the sooner you can get started, and the sooner you can advocate for that in your school district, and that includes parents that might be watching this, reach out and challenge your school districts to tell you and to show you the programs they have. And if they don't have any, that's okay. Partner alongside them and help them develop those programs. It's important to get started as soon as possible.
And for parents that are listening, he's at Barrington 220 in Illinois, so you can reach out to him specifically. Anisha, what about you? What's your kind of like walk away shot to kind of encourage us as we go forward?
Yeah, and I just have to hop onto everything that Phil said. Knowledge is power. Asking these questions will, at least if the answer isn't there, it'll get people thinking, and it'll get people realizing that parents care about this stuff. These questions are being asked, and maybe we should think about it. In addition to that, your district may have policies that you're not aware of. So ask those questions and find out what the existing infrastructure is and what your role is in helping protect student privacy. I'm always reluctant to feel like I'm just like plugging resources that we've created, but I dropped a couple in the chat that I think really are on point. There's a parent Q&A that we developed that are just questions that might help you kind of get the ball rolling with your district. And then there's a communication toolkit that we developed for schools and districts, and it kind of gets to how districts can be more transparent about their policies and how they treat student data privacy. And it also has tips and kind of takeaway documents that are like sample policies and things like that can be really helpful. In addition to that, I think being really transparent with your students is key. Being transparent with your parents, being transparent with your students is key. Privacy is hard, and it raises a lot of tough questions. So is cybersecurity, but I think if everyone is at the table, then there's trust, and that's what privacy and cybersecurity are really about.
And it comes down to that education element, right? So Pooh, send us home. What you got?
Yeah, look at everyone. If you're a teacher, student, or a facilitator, the world that's kind of coming at us, it's already here. I mean, these are the cream of the crop when it comes to jobs, innovation, what the industry is doing. We haven't even touched on AI and ML, because one of the things Carl talked about is all that data. Well, guess what? It's artificial intelligence and machine learning that acts on all that data. And that's a whole nother webinar on its own. And here's the thing, going forward, these are the jobs that are going to persist. These are the skills that are going to be in demand in industry. So from an educational standpoint, we can't be teaching things that was great 10 years ago. We need to be teaching things that's upcoming. And this is a huge, huge, huge field. And not to go off on a tangent, we need more women in this field. We have got to get more women in this field. I don't know why women do not choose IT, engineering, computer science. There's so many great jobs to be had right after you get done with your training. And that's been one of my biggest frustrating things as an educator. My AP classes are like 20 guys and 2 girls. I'm like, that is so whack and out of balance. We've got to convince women. I don't know why. Maybe they feel like, maybe women feel like they need to work twice as hard because it's such a male dominated industry. But there is so many jobs, opportunities, growth, research that is at our fingertips. And I feel that everything that both my colleagues said, that the education field, we have to inquire into our district. Hey, where's your cyber curriculum? Hey, where's your AI curriculum? Oh, you don't have any. Okay, we've got to get it here. Not today. I mean, not yesterday, but today and tomorrow, and as quickly as we can.
Yeah, it sounds like we could probably do 3 or 4 more webinars. I mean, just one. I mean, I feel like the one focusing on females and coding and CS fields is a huge one. Sandy Paul, who's on the chat, is also someone we've talked about a lot. She and I have gone back and forth about that a lot, about why that needs to happen, and it starts to happen at the middle school level. So somehow we're losing females in the field. But it also sounds like we need to do a whole one just on parents too. And another one just on Karate Kid, but that's a whole nother webinar topic, I feel like. But I do want to thank our panelists. Thank you guys. I know we went a little bit over time there. We did start a little bit late, so we got a whole hour in there. A lot of things that flew by fast. So thank you, Anisha, Tapu, and Phil. Guys, they're amazing resources. This will be recorded and will be sent back out. I want to thank the folks at Rex Academy as well for hosting this event. I hope to bring them, hopefully we can bring back another one of these down the road and maybe bring this panel back together and just kind of check in on some of those still lots of lingering issues that we need to get to. So this has been a panel on cybersecurity hosted by Rex Academy. Thank you guys so much and appreciate your time today. Go out there, have a great day, and don't click on those links, not right away. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.